All right, YouTube, I've got a cold today. It's like I just get over the stomach bug that I had, for several days, and then I get a cold. Thankfully, it looks like it's one of those like 24-hour colds. I'm already feeling some better. Like I had a fever in the morning, a low-grade fever, stuffy nose and so forth. Now I feel, okay enough to make a video, I suppose. That's great, because I needed to make this in response to what people are saying, not only about Milo and his book slash being declared sort of gay person of the year, which is great. It's hilariously fun to watch him troll people, which is, let's face it, what he's doing. But in general, what people in the legacy media and lamestream culture are saying about what is or is not acceptable speech. I will put it out there is no such thing as hate speech. It does not exist. You may disagree, that's fine, but you're wrong. The First Amendment was not written to protect people that were saying things that were common knowledge or generally understood to be true. It was written fundamentally to protect the opinions of those who have extremely unpopular opinions, to the point at which people may attempt to use the tyranny of the majority to actually censor those views. Now, we've fallen short, certainly in the past especially, on this mark. We've given, for example, the government the unconstitutional ability to censor things that are on TV and radio. The internet less so. There's very, very little. Private companies set the basic standards for their content, which is acceptable. Sometimes they go a little, like Twitter certainly goes too far on that token. Here on YouTube, nobody cares if you swear. You can certainly have R-rated material here, and it's not going to get you kicked offline. It used to be more of a PG-13 site, by the way. Literally, that was the standard. If you said fuck too many times, somebody'd flag you down. If you were smoking weed, you'd get flagged down. If you put up a grindcore title that was too risque, you'd get flagged down. Now it's sort of a rated R site. So anything shy of hardcore porn, essentially, is generally going to be tolerated on YouTube. That or harassment, including the opinions of people that certainly the social justice warriors would like to censor. People who talk about, like, global Jews or something like that, sort of white pro kill the white people, Klan members and so forth. They can put their views out there too. Maybe they have to modulate them a bit, but essentially the fundamental premise is they can say basically what they want on their channels. The government has attempted to censor stuff in the past. Schools are notorious for this. Schools will often try to ban books. They get huge backlash when they do, and that gives me hope, honestly, for the First Amendment. But hate speech is a totally arbitrary classification. What would have been considered, if the term had existed 100 years ago, it would have been applied to totally different principles than it does today. And 100 years from now, what you consider hate speech will probably not be considered so in 100 years. There is no objective basis upon which that term is actually used. I don't personally, by the way, I'll say this about the those four thugs that beat up the mentally disabled dude there in Chicago. I don't believe that the term hate crime has any relevance either. Why would the motive behind an attack be an aggravating factor? Wouldn't the attack itself be aggravating enough? I would think if you beat someone up for being, you want their wallet, well, you beat them up. If you beat somebody up because they're black, well, you beat them up. If you beat somebody up because they're gay or something, it's all the same. The action is the same. It doesn't matter what it was premised upon. No, it's an arbitrary classification. I do not believe that terminology should even be used within our legal system. Unfortunately, some pro-censorship groups have foisted it upon people without realizing, I think, and this is the kicker, without realizing that in 100 years, what is defined under those statutes is likely to be vastly different. You go back 100 years. I was editing a work earlier, which is now done, and I'm just finishing up the cover art for it, called Demons and Tongues. It was by Alma White, who was a sort of a member of the Pillar of Fire movement, spoke out against Pentecostals, against people who spoke in tongues, thought they were demon-possessed, and so forth. And in that specific work, she takes up the rather eugenic line. By the way, she was the first female bishop in the United States, so this is a person with significant historical clout. On that eugenic line, she was a feminist, number one, which is funny. She was an extreme zealot and a member of the Ku Klux Klan, or an auxiliary, I should say, of the Klan. because, of course, she was female. Let females in the clan back then. I don't know if they do now, actually. But took up the line of, oh, well, black people are sons of Canaan, and so they've got some sort of curse and so forth. It was all very eugenic interpretation of Christianity. Now, back then, that was considered common sense. It was considered perfectly acceptable to say these things. Now it would be considered inflammatory rhetoric. 100 years from now, who knows what it'll be considered. Likewise, if you had said back then that feminism was hand in hand with this, that women should have equal rights to men, that would have been considered quite inflammatory. It would have been interpreted as though you were saying men are lesser or shouldn't be able to do this, that, and the other thing, and our whole legal system, our whole principle should be overthrown. It would have been considered, socially heretical or something along those lines. Now, of course, it's considered acceptable. The idea of safe spaces, the idea that there should be places where certain types of speech are off limits, hug boxes, echo chambers, is now currently considered sacrosanct by the whiners on certain college campuses. Not all, by the way. Some people overblow this a little bit. It's the special snowflake clubs that we're seeing are not widespread. They're just very vocal, so they sound that way. That is considered by those particular groups of people to be a good thing. I would consider it to be a breach of the First Amendment. I would consider it to be a breach, in essence, technically speaking, of the right to privacy. If a person wishes to speak privately in one of these safe spaces about something that's not authorized by a college, I don't see how they should come under any ire for doing so. And so hate speech is, because it's malleable, because it is understood to be different things in different ages. You go back 50 years, you use the term anti-Semitism, what you mean is somebody who's a Nazi. If you go back 50 years. Now, anti-Semitism is, according to the definitions of the ADL or some group, or AIPAC, you question the right of Israel to expand its borders into neighboring states. You think that it's a little odd that they haven't signed the NPT but have nuclear weapons. You criticize Netanyahu specifically because he's under a corruption probe. You're an anti-Semite unless you're Jewish while doing that. You dislike Judaism as a religious movement. All of these things would generally be thought of, even if you're anti-circumcision. The idea of infants being involuntarily circumcised. By the way, I am against that because there's no medical basis to do it. I don't care about all these flawed studies conducted by a bunch of Christian theocratic so-called colleges and universities. It's a bunch of bullshit. I think that people should have the right to do what they wish to do with their bodies, and that does encompass, by the way, women having abortions, whoever you want to sleep with, if it's consensual, they're all adults, who cares, and so forth. But that term has been stretched beyond recognition in a fairly short period of time and has become meaningless, to the point at which you have insulted, for you didn't even know they were a Jewish individual. You have said something that offended a Jewish individual, therefore you are an anti-Semite. You are a racist in the minds of some simply by being white. Just by virtue of your race, oddly enough, you are automatically a bigot. There's something wrong with you and you need to pay reparations or apologize or feel guilty for some retard white privilege which doesn't even exist. And that's also another thing right now in discourse. A lot of people, not a majority, I think it's a vocal minority. It's not a tiny minority, but a substantial minority of the U.S. population thinks that white privilege is a thing. They're very vocal about it, and so they seem like the majority. I don't think so, by the way. But at the same time, there are those who say that that specific term itself is a form of racism because you are aiming it specifically at a race of people without looking at individuals within that group. It's a stereotyping of white people as having some sort of deep secret privilege or something by which they consume all before them and so forth. I happen to agree with that assessment, by the way. But perhaps in 10, 20 years, that will be an overwhelming majority view, that white privilege does not exist, that this is currently a cultural backwards dark age in which it's even being discussed, and it will move back to being a very tiny fringe view. I think that's likely, by the way, over the next couple of decades. I don't see things moving further left, and left and right have no meaning either. All of these terms that people use, when a term is malleable and poorly defined, it tends to be propaganda. When a term doesn't really have any solid meaning attached to it, it tends to be used for propagandistic purposes. Antisemitism has become one of those terms. Bigotry, racism, sexism, homophobia. I would say including, by the way, the idea of the use of the term like heterophobia by maybe the alt-right. Yes, there are some people who take up the tack of, oh, well, straight people are boring, straight males especially, is like, they're just stupid heteros or something like that. But at the same time, there is an attempt to stretch that term beyond to indicate, and this has been done for a decade now, well, if you believe in gay marriage, then you're heterophobic. There's something wrong with you and you're not a Christian or something along those lines. It works both ways. Let's not pretend that it's just the pink-haired people that are doing this. But hate speech itself has been used to define all sorts of different things without any actual solid meaning being associated with it. That is, at a whim, a person can stretch the definition. The term rape has unfortunately been misused in this manner. There was, I can't remember which university it was, but there was some crazy professor there that said that males farting was a form of rape, specifically because they would fart loudly and then the females would fart less loudly in a sign of submissiveness, so it was a form of rape. And somebody made a joke account there and said something along the lines of, oh, fart rape has just occurred on the bus, a picture of rapist, and I can remember that, and it was funny at the time. But it was a serious attempt by somebody who supposedly is an academic to completely alter the definition of this act that has nothing to do with farting. It has nothing to do with some of this social justice crap that we often see. But the definition is so malleable and so meaningless at this point because it's been used in that way. It's been used as a political cudgel by people. And because of that, it ceases to have meaning. The danger, especially with that term, is that people will stop actually caring about the fundamental issue of actual rape because they're used to seeing a bunch of social justice warrior professors pervert that term beyond all possible human boundaries of thought to the point at which it becomes humorous to them. It's no longer something regrettable and criminal and evil. It's something that's actually something you crack jokes about. We've seen this happen with anti-Semitism already. Back in the 90s, every other sitcom, they constantly crack jokes about being Jewish, these Jewish stereotypes, which were being capitalized upon by people who themselves were Jewish in a managerial role within Hollywood. Meanwhile, of course, actual Jews on the street, they get sort of branded with this same stereotype. This has happened time and time again. Christians have suffered with the same problem, by the way. The Christian majority in the United States, because of the humor made at sort of anti-Christian stuff in general. There's a difference between, well, I'm not a Christian, I don't really like Christianity, and here I'm going to constantly mock it and make money doing so. There's a little bit of a difference between the two. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, censor comedy or something. I'm simply suggesting terms when used should not be malleable. If they are malleable, there's a problem. If they're malleable, then they're not pure terms in any sense. They have no actual meaning. The meaning is whatever somebody happens to want to make it. And in the social media age, it goes a step beyond this. Because of the viral spreading of something like that, a new definition for a term or a new term itself or something along those lines, it spreads much more rapidly than mainstream culture can cope with it, number one. Then perhaps the more cogent minds among us, number two, can combat that overstretched term in an attempt to actually cause things to have some sort of meaning. It's very difficult because there are so many millions of people participating. So I just thought I'd make a video about this. Hate speech is a non-issue because nobody seems to be able to agree upon what it actually means. If there's no agreed upon definition for hate speech, it has no meaning at all. Certainly, if you walk up to somebody and you say, oh, no, fuck your race, fuck black people, start beating a black person to death or something, yeah, that makes you guilty of assault, maybe assault with a deadly weapon or whatever. But does the hate speech aspect mean anything? No, the person's still been beaten up. It doesn't matter what the actual motive was. It doesn't matter whether they hated black people, or maybe they hated men, or maybe they hated people who were of a different economic class than themselves. It doesn't really matter. The end result has been the same. The person is a violent individual, should simply be labeled as such, simply prosecuted as such. Problem solved. There's nothing more to worry about. The person's been prosecuted. Hopefully the victim has been given a little bit of financial vengeance, so to speak, and it's all good. When you start making up terms or overstretching terms, you can be sure that they have no real meaning. They have no real validity whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. That's about all. Peace out.